This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. Your host today, Russ Hugo, and welcome back to the I Want to Believe Minute, where we unpack the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. Today, helping me to explore minute 26, which is running from approximately 25 minutes, as Scully enters the hospital room to speak with Christian, through to 20 minutes and 59 seconds, as Scully leaves to talk with Father Ybarra, is a first-timer on the I Want to Believe Minute. Not first time on the X-Cast, but on the I Want to Believe Minute is Jessica Miskelly. Welcome, and how are you?
Hello, I'm moderately okay. Thank you, Russ.
Cheers to that. And thanks so much for joining us. Before we start, just a quick reminder to follow the X-Cast on social media. So you can go to Linktree, and that's linktr.ee/the Xcast, and there's no hyphen in the Xcast. And if you're enjoying the show, please do drop us a quick 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, please don't forget that you can always subscribe on Patreon. So that's patreon.com/thexcast for early releases of episodes, bonus content, tons over the years, and helping out the friendly folks behind the scene pay for all the stuff that keeps us all running. Let's get into it. The first question I want to start off with is, when did you first see I Want to Believe, Jessica?
I anticipated this question, and it's probably the only case in any of the, X-File, whatever, backlog that I don't know the answer to. I don't know when I first saw this because by the time it came out, I had very much moved on from the X-Files. I was concentrated on career and uni and stuff like that, and I barely even remember it coming out. So I know it wasn't when it came out. It definitely wasn't at the cinema, but I can't remember, sadly.
That's interesting, though, considering it's one of the more recent ones, but I get it, because it is in that wasteland of sorts, that in-between space. It's kind of hard unless you were there in the theater, because I don't exactly remember. I roughly remember the context of when I saw it. Like, I got it on DVD and did that, but I don't remember the year or anything like that either. Okay, that being said, when you're not sure exactly when you first saw it, what are your thoughts now, or even if you remember what your thoughts were when you first saw it compared to now? And how would you rate this out of 10?
I had a few goes at watching this, and I have to say either I got old and more aware of my mortality in the intervening years between my X-File obsession and when I saw this, or I was living by myself or something, because the first few times I tried to watch it, I was a bit freaked out, which is embarrassing to say as an X-File, and I didn't finish watching it, and then it was only the third or the fourth go where I watched it, and then obviously I've watched it again in the last couple of weeks. Look, I like it better than Fight the Future. I do prefer the return to the Vancouver type aesthetic, the more focus on the story rather than action. But that said, I feel like there's a few missteps in the story. I feel like there's some missed potential. Some of the characterization feels a bit funny to me, especially for Scully. So in terms of a rating, probably a 6.5. Like, I think it deserves a credit. Probably not a distinction would be my summation.
Well argued. We both agree on most of those points. I guess there's a lot of nuance and details in there that we haven't explored, but in general, I agree that I prefer it to Fight the Future, although, like I said in the previous minutes, I understand why a lot of fans greatly prefer Fight the Future. This is just more of the scope and the scale of what I find appealing about the X-Files. But there's a lot I really do like, but there are, like you said, there are some missteps, there are some questionable handling of some sensitive topics. Some things are a little clunky, but overall, I like the atmosphere a lot, and that helps me rate it a little bit higher is just the aesthetic, but also just the nature of the fact they're shooting in the snow, the soundtrack. It just has a feeling to it that, yeah, the aesthetic puts it up higher than the content necessarily deserves. But there's some interesting ideas. In some, for me, it's a really fun movie to talk about, maybe more so than to watch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's type 2 fun, where it's more enjoyable after the event than during the event.
Yeah, speaking of, I was wanting to get more of your thoughts about what it was in the film that freaked you out, considering the X-Files itself dealt with a lot of fairly disturbing and rough topics.
Yeah, well, that's what I alluded to. I think partly it may have just been that I had grown up perhaps a bit and was just a bit more aware of things, or was a bit more scared of things, or had some funny experiences, which I certainly had. In a remote place, so it wasn't the gruesome stuff I never really liked, but like you said, that's always been a hallmark of X-Files. But sometimes I do find it hard to take. But just the abduction scene, and also, I mean, it's essentially torture, keeping someone in a box where they can see that awful things are happening and they're anticipating awful things happening to them. I really struggled with that at that stage of my life for some reason. And the running the car off the road as well. That was one of these background fears that I always had, driving around at night by myself in fairly remote areas. And it turns out this place where, we'll get to it, but where Cheryl Cunningham is abducted, it's not even that remote. It looks remote on first viewing, but then when they go back to the crime scene later, you see it's just a suburban area. So just all of that just freaked me out, I guess. Perhaps overly so.
That's fair. The scene in particular later, which is not one of our minutes, but we're trying to remember the character's name. I believe the actor is Nikki Acox, but I can't remember.
Cheryl Cunningham, I think.
That is Cheryl Cunningham, who is in the box. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that scene, her acting is fantastic, and it is
very convincing.
Harrowing, is to say the least.
What was interesting to me is that doing reading, just quickly, like for this podcast, the movie had actually been instructed by the studio to have a PG rating, and it doesn't. I actually didn't check what it was rated, but it seems like it should be M rated to me. Maybe I'm too conservative. What is it actually rated? Do you know?
I'm going to look it up now that you mentioned. I always thought it was an R, but...
It does not seem like PG content to me.
No. I would... Okay, it's PG-13.
Wow. Okay. That's not what I'd rate it. I have an 11-year-old and she won't be watching it in 2 years' time.
I guess I'm trying to think of, if you compare it to some other things that get R's like maybe 7, I could see why they would rate it a PG-13, but... Yeah, the gore isn't necessarily and the torture isn't as explicit as something like Saw or Hostel or Seven or something like that. But the subject matter is heavy. You're dealing with, child abuse and...
Yeah, and for me, and I suspect for a lot of people, that's scarier. I think gore and, sometimes language, things can get a high rating because they've got bad language, but neither of those things is, it's not always particularly realistic, which makes it less scary, whereas these sort of heavy themes feel very real and therefore much more scary. Anyway, that's my take on the rating system.
I think it's a very reasonable take, and if you run for the board, I'll help work on the campaign. All right, with that in mind, let's get into talking about minute 26. This is the minute here where it starts off with Scully entering the hospital room to speak with Christian, and then at the very end, leaves to confront Father Ibarra in the hallway. What are your first thoughts about this minute? Anything that really jumped out to you that you'd like to cover first? My
first thought was very, very superficial and costume related. I just thought that is the nicest, most tailored lab coat I've ever seen that Scully is wearing. That was my first thought on watching this minute.
That is a good thought, and I am going to back up and look at that lab coat here in proper. It is very nice. It works well with the blue undercoat, too. And the fact that the blue of the sleeves are perfectly, just the shape coming out of the white sleeves of the lab coat. It's very tight-fitting.
Yes.
For a doctor's gown.
Yes.
Yeah, I get it. It's really very chic. Very chic. Good observation. I'm going to raise you on something superficial and comment on the set decoration.
Oh, that's much less superficial.
Just curious to see. I'll throw this out and see what your thoughts are. I really find the coloring, I mean, there's a lot of blues throughout the film. It's very cold and oppressive and feels institutional, the cold floor, but they're using the blues and pinks that I still feel, I believe, that it is a children's ward. It feels realistic, even though it's pretty gothic. It is filmed on location in Riverview Hospital in Coquitlam. So just as an FYI, that's a little east of Vancouver, kind of like a suburb. And I guess this is used for a lot of different filming. In general, all of these scenes in the hospital, but here in particular, setting this up, Scully walks in, the blues and the pinks. This is where it kind of gets superficial, but it allows her as a character, particularly with the red hair, to really pop out as a warm presence in this atmosphere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The red hair against the blue background, because I mean the blue or a green or some other cool background is very fitting with a hospital setting, and it does fit with the mood as well. The cold. Like you were saying, I'm interested in the word gothic you've used. I hadn't thought of that, but that works as well. I mean, we haven't quite got there yet, but when Scully goes out into the hallway afterwards, and even in the Christian's room itself, you can sense that it's an older building. So, in perhaps a slightly gothic style, it's not a shiny new government hospital facility. With that filming location, is it actually an active hospital or is it a defunct or no longer used hospital? Do you know?
My hunch is back then it was even abandoned, but now, as far as I can tell, it's very, very much abandoned, and people consider it might be haunted, etc.
Yep. Yeah, it definitely has that look about it. Now that you say it, you can see that it's been set dressed. But yeah, it does have the feel of a real building rather than a stage.
Even think later there's like some of the foyer with the statue, and just looking out into the hallway when Scully walks in, there's the lamps up above that are kind of top-shaped, like a spinning top, teardrop kind of a combo, which also, if you look at them, they kind of look like UFOs, which is kind of cute.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that.
And then the floor being like that black, shiny, really oppressively dark blue. It's unrealistic. I can't imagine any hospital ever being painted that way. So it's very stylized, but the fact that that's the transition from the rest of the hospital into the children's ward, and then later when there's like the OR, which feels almost like we're in a military setting, it just feels impromptu and mixed with a little bit of that archaic classicness. It's an interesting space that gives these scenes character, dancing right between believability and gothicness is kind of what I was trying to get at, and I appreciate your patience.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it, because you don't necessarily want anything in a story on film to be exactly realistic. You want it to have, to evoke something, and that's what that gothicness can do. And the word oppressive that you've used a few times is interesting. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but I feel like also the camera angles throughout this minute are always pointing slightly upward, as if the character with whose point of view we're with is being looked down upon. But I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly, but I'm getting that in my head memory.
I think you're right. I think a lot of it also is supposed to be sort of from Christian's perspective. So when Scully first walks in the room, the camera's kind of at the level of the bed.
Yeah.
Looking up, and then I think that it's jumping back and forth between the two there. Speaking of, what are your thoughts here in general about the character and the relationship between Scully and Christian?
Oh, that's a hard one. You've used this word before. I feel like a curmudgeon for saying this, but I have an instant reaction against super cute, super well-behaved, super nice, sick kids, which isn't necessarily fair, but I just my immediate reaction was, oh, this kid's really, really sick, and so that's really, really sad. But he's also really, really nice. And that's kind of just so Hollywood and so annoying. But that's possibly just a personal pet peeve that I get hung up on. In terms of Scully's performance, I think that, or Gillian's performance, Scully's character, I think that's really on the money. I feel like she talks to Christian in the same way she spoke to Emily or other children that they interacted with back in the original series. The sort of cadence or the timbre of her voice changes, and she becomes very gentle and also lowers herself down to their level so as to be less intimidating. So all that fits really well. But I just have a bit of a reaction against the angelic child trope.
I think it's very fair. And perhaps for folks who have experienced children in those situations more than others, my assumption is that it's going to be a little bit more resonant, that this is a very intense thing to deal with, whether as a parent or as a relative or a physician in this state, that seems likely to be like a real foundational element of that relationship. So I think your critique is fair. It's very legitimate. I wonder how much of it is a need to be, or a want, not a need, but a want by the production team to be sensitive to the actor in a sense. And I bring that up only because I found this link on the website, or on somebody's website, can't remember if it was on the X-Files wiki or where, to a newspaper article in the Coquitlam newspaper called, I guess, The Now. This was back in July 25th of 2008, where they have like a little interview with the actor Marco Nicole and just kind of talk a little bit with the parents and talk about how they got cast. And I guess Carter contacted an Easter Seals camp in Squamish, which is nearby. And this was a camp for children with disabilities, specifically looking for a child with cerebral palsy. And they kind of make an interesting note here that the character doesn't specifically have cerebral palsy. I mean, we now know it's Sandhoff disease, but at the time that even they didn't know, it was so secretive. But it sounds like the kid, this was his first time doing any professional acting, but he had a great time. I wonder if that's one of those things you have to kind of dance around, in the sense of you're going to be hiring a novice and you're hiring a child. And I wonder if it might be easier, especially considering that they've got a condition, to play it safe and go for the angelic child, just so that you don't overgo the other direction where it could be a harmful thing, if that makes sense. But your point is fair.
Yeah.
I'm just putting the caveat of, might be nervous. I think when it comes to storytelling, authenticity, I definitely appreciate your point on that and would agree 100%.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment as well, I think. Yeah, there's always so much to consider in any sort of story-making decision, right? And you're not going to please everybody. So.
Yeah, and then the scene ends. Christian mentions that the man is looking at him and makes him feel uncomfortable. And then Scully walks out, and the last words she says are, "Don't be afraid." And this is a totally irrelevant thing to connect, but I was looking at the casting, and the character's last name, which I don't think is ever really mentioned, is Fearon. And so I don't know if that's like a play on words there a little bit, but I thought I would mention it because this is the I Want to Believe Minute, and you really got to dig deep for nuance to talk about. Regardless, any last thoughts here about their conversation, about his perception of Father Ibarra, or anything else that you want to talk about?
Just on your final comment there, it's Chris Carter we're talking about. I'm sure the name Christian Fearon was very deliberate.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not too nuts. I think he's trained us to look for those purple connections. Okay. Anything else, though, that you want to talk about for this minute?
I don't think so.
Well, great. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back to cover minute 27 very soon. But until then, always remember, trust no one.